Welcome to the 20th episode of the Animal Riot podcast, brought to you by Animal Riot Press, a literary press for books that matter. It's your producer, Katie, here, and this episode has been edited to reflect our new name. If you're new to the Animal Riot community, welcome, and you can find out more about us at animalriotpress.com. Now on to the episode with your host, Brian Birnbaum, and today's guests, Lynne DeSilva-Johnson, a.k.a. Elae, and Caits Meissner.
I'm your host, Brian Birnbaum. We're here today with Lynne DeSilva-Johnson, aka Elae, founder and creative director of the Operating System, interdisciplinary creative practitioner, cultural scholar, and assistant professor at Pratt. We also have, for the third and certainly not last time, the wonderful Caits Meissner, director of the Prison and Justice Writing Program at PEN America, author and illustrator of the collection of poems Let It Die Hungry, published by none other than the Operating System. So welcome. Anything you guys want to add to your, introductions to this little universe we have here?
Well, we can let the listeners in on what we were talking about just before we started, which was the inadequacies of biographies and how to decide what goes in them.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, I deal a lot with the idea that words are actually like very problematic, very inadequate, and also just sort of stand in as this.
Oh, I could not agree more. I've been doing a lot of like research on the brain and how it functions, and just like, in terms of just like our metaphysical reality, like language is just so limited. The more you like think about it. Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable.
So my even like taking of a different name had to do with the notion that you could create a name for yourself, right? Mm-hmm. That like we have these names that stand in for ourselves, and that those things come with all of these associations, and that like there actually is the ability to sort of like rewrite that. And a lot of what I work on is like a sort of self-hacking and body hacking and mind hacking, like both for myself and other people. And what does it mean when you change your name? What does it mean when you decide to call yourself artist versus creative practitioner? Creative practitioner is a little harder, but artist has a lot of associations that I don't necessarily want to call forward. I work across many mediums. Artist, I think for most people, makes you assume that I'm talking specifically about visual art in the 2 and 3 dimensions, and I also work in sound, and I work in performance, and blah blah blah. So
is that your association with art? It's not necessarily like literature. You don't think of literature first when you think of art.
I do, but when you see a bio, if it said, Lynne DeSilva-Johnson or Elae artist, would you assume that I meant that I worked with text?
Yeah, because that's pretty broad. No, you're right. My first thought would definitely not be like writing or like, something that's not sculpting or like painting. Yeah, those would be like the first things that come into my mind, or graphic design. But can you define a creative practitioner, I guess, like if you can, just for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term?
I think for me, it's not an official term, right? It means that I work in creative practice across a number of creative practices.
So
and spaces. Yeah. I mean, so I think that, when you're looking for words to define yourself, if you're looking to not, box yourself in with things that people do have associations with, sometimes bringing in new language, whether it's a name that looks really strange on paper that someone can't necessarily pronounce without asking you, right? Or whether it's, what do you mean by creative practitioner? I'm always interested in things that bring about a question, right? Bring about dialogue rather than closing it off. So to say that I'm an artist, like someone's not necessarily going to actually ask what kind. They may like have already closed that off when they saw my bio. They're like, this person is a visual artist. But I don't want to say that, right? Like for me, all creative practice, whatever the medium, whether it's music or sound or visual art or text or, social practice or any of these things, are all part of a way of engaging with the world creatively, that you use different mediums in order to do whatever happens to be the right medium at the time. And I think that, Caits, you do this too in a certain way, right? I mean, you go across mediums based on like what process you're dealing with, right?
Yeah, for a long time I was working with music, with poetry. I haven't done that in years now, but it's certainly a part of my history. I ignored doing illustration for years. I have a graphic design degree. And only recently have I begun to bring things together, and actually much in part to your Well, I love to tell this story because I was like, I want just a poetry book.
I was like, oh no.
You were like, I only want it if it's all of you. And it was a great thing to be pushed towards because in the book, there's illustrations, there's poetry comics, there's poems, there's prose notes that kind of unpack what I'm talking about in the book. And then there is these long, formerly lesson plans, but now just a series of questions. So I think too, and I just added back into my bio, actually, I had taken it out. I put DIY spirited, poly creative, because I'm not just a poet, and I'm not just a writer, and I'm not just an illustrator, and but we're like blessedly in this day and age where I think that a lot of people are able to be multiple things in their creativity, more and more so. But I think we still haven't figured out how to quite talk about it. Yeah, it feels limiting to just say one thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think
and tricky to package.
There's also sort of these like histories of legitimacy, right? So it's sort of like what you got to say, when you got to call yourself an artist, or when you had permission to call yourself a scholar, or, and I think a lot of those things kind of come from the way that we've been taught that like certain levels of achievement that are culturally deemed, acceptable or like validated, like that at a certain point you get some sort of permission to use certain terminology in reference to yourself, right? I mean, like, are you a published author, right? I mean, the conversations about self-publishing, like, like, are you published? Did you publish it yourself, right? I mean, in a lot of the ways we talk about legitimacy with publishing is like, did someone publish something? Are they a writer? You'll hear those kind of jokes about questions of like, when you're like, oh, I'm a writer, and people will be like, oh, well, what have you published? Well, have I read it? And it's sort of like, no, well, I'm a writer because I write, because that's my practice, right? The sort of the professionalization versus the practice is like so different. And like, I think the bio becomes a place where you can actually really trouble that by using language that is not necessarily expected, and also deciding that you have permission to call yourself things.
Yes. And also I think, do you feel like when you're in the classroom at Pratt with your wildly interesting syllabus that you're in a creative practice in teaching?
Oh my God. Yes, absolutely. Right. I mean, like there's an artist, and I can't think of her name, but who refers to her art as life art. And she has like, I know one of the people who like keeps her archive, and she calls this person and like tells them about like how her chakras are doing, and like all of these different humans in the world like keep her archive of her life, which she considers her art. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that this is a thing that someone could do, right? I mean, and it sort of becomes legitimized once someone calls it that, right? But where are the edges of creative practice? For me, there are no edges of creative practice, whether it is the conversation that we were just having, which has to do with like the body. Caits and I walking here, we're sort of talking about becoming conditioned to certain ideas of gender and the body and weight and health. But why is, creatively thinking about the language that's associated with that and hacking that? Like, that's totally a creative practice. It doesn't have to be published. No one has to see it. Creativity for me is, about challenge and like reframing things, right? Representation is creative practice. So it might just be that I'm saying like, this is the way that I've languaged this all my life. I need to re-language it, but I don't necessarily feel like I need to put it on paper for someone else to read it anymore. I think I used to more than I do now, but a lot of my creative practices now are much more like internal.
Well, you said a great thing to me years ago. I've come back to it in my own mind many a time, which was you have to think of your creativity projects, really idea-wise, as a tree with many seeds. So you can have ideas all the time, and you should be able to have ideas all the time. And only a few of those will actually plant and grow into something. I love this metaphor. It's a wonderful it's very permission offering because you don't have to latch on to every single idea. And I think and also the idea of kind of thinking about life as a creative practice also brings me closer to the experience of being in flow, which then makes it much easier to do more tangible creative practices if I'm looking at it takes the pressure off in some ways around exactly what you're saying, professionalization. And certainly I'm doing a better job working at PEN America when I think of it as also part of my creative practice and as a community artist, because there's so much creativity in that role, what we get to do. So I think that the borders and boundaries are sticky, but it is interesting because in my bio, people always go to PEN America right now because A, PEN America is a shiny name, rightfully so. We do a lot of amazing work. And B, I think that the work in the prison and justice space has exploded in the last few years. So it's very attractive to people or interesting to people or intriguing to people. So yeah, the negotiation of who you are in the world. And if I stayed there, I could get offended. But if I see it as part of my creative practice in the world, then all of me gets to show up there too. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But then you also get to understand that like people latch on to what's easiest for them to understand.
Yes.
And so like, or something that like is exciting to them. And so like I recently did a reading at Bowery Poetry Club for this event that they do monthly called Voce. Ars Poetica does it and it's awesome. And there's like one poet and then there's like activists. There was someone from Make the Road who was amazing. There was a comic, there was a musician.
Oh, I think my colleague did that recently.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. So I was invited to do this. I was invited as the spoken word person and I came up and I was getting introduced and it was my reading. But I got introduced as the founder of the operating system. I'm like, this is my reading. Like, that was the only part of the bio that they read. But, you know, I have books coming out. I publish all the time. Like, I have all this other stuff that's happening in my life. I perform constantly. Like, I'm a teacher, you know. But that's what I get associated with, you know. And so, like, people just latch on to these things. And they're like, oh, that's who you are. Like, I'll do a reading and I'll get off the stage and people will come up to me and be like, how do I publish with you? And I'm like, definitely not like this.
I have to laugh because people are amazing.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, the social skills of the poetry world are not always like the best.
You don't let them recite the first few lines of their book first?
I mean,
here,
you know,
go right now. Here's a mic.
Go right now.
Here's your audition.
Give me the first three and I'll decide. Go.
Go right now. You know, but I think that we pigeonhole each other. I think that people pigeonhole themselves. I think that a lot of it has to do with ideas about like success, like, you know, even with musicians or writers or something, like once you do become successful, who allows themselves to change and who doesn't, right? Who keeps doing the same thing. I'm reading this like incredible like oral history of David Bowie and I you know, it's really good. But, you know, his whole thing was that like, I'm going to just keep making different music. I'm going to keep going from style to style. And sometimes people really didn't like what he was doing at all, didn't think that he should be doing these things. And he was like, I didn't care really, you know, because he like continued to be creative. But we often don't really allow that. Right? Like,
I was a massive Red Hot Chili Peppers fan when I was in high school. I had deep dissonance about liking their later and their earlier music. Like, I had a problem with it. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I was like, the funk stuff's great, and it's, like, kind of more pure. But, like, this later, like, British pop influence stuff is really good, too.
Yeah.
I don't know what to think right now. And there's all these, like, little Chili Peppers fanboys that are out there. Like, they're like, no, the older stuff is the only shit that's good. Like, you know what I mean?
So when you become a public figure, which you are as soon as you start making any sort of work and sharing it, right? You are a public figure. And, I mean, what responsibility do you have to that public to, like, give them what they want? Or what responsibility do you have to that public to make sure that you're challenging them? Like, what does it mean to kind of be a public figure with your work, right? I mean, I think that this is so interesting. What does it mean to be expected to be a poet? Like, people assume that that's what you do, right? I mean, I think that in the last couple of years, the reason why all these words came into my bio was I was like, I really did poetry a lot in the last 15 years because I was really poor. And like the other parts of my practice that are a lot more involved and involve more space and more resources and more money, like I just couldn't do them. And so I didn't feel like it was a loss. I just felt like it was a transition into a period in which I was like, well, let's use this material for a while. It's free, you know, but then like people get just really associated with like doing a certain thing. And so I felt like I needed to carve out space for those other things and have people associate me with that other language. And it's really interesting. I mean, since bringing cultural scholar back into the way that I refer to myself, I've done much more scholarly work in the last couple of years than I had for a while.
Well, who else is going to claim it if you don't for yourself, you know? And I also think that there's different ways of creating, and some people are really obsessed with their form, and in some ways I have envied that in the past because I feel like I'm all over the map. So am I ever going to get great at one thing? And I spin in my mind around that. But this month I felt like electrically creative in a way I haven't in a while, which is very welcome. Keep coming. And I've been writing 30 poems in 30 days for April, National Poetry Month with a group of women. So there's some real accountability. You don't want to be the one that didn't send the poem, because nobody has missed this time around.
What's the punishment?
There is none, but it's just,
It's just
but
shame.
it's shame. And also, it's accountability, it's a responsibility. Like, we chose to do this together, so show up, even if it's a haiku,
JP keeps saying, like, today's a haiku day. I can't.
JP Howard, who's an amazing author, also in the operating system and in the writing group, is in 2 writing groups
I know.
and writes 2 poems a day for 30-30. I don't understand. And there's been some amazing haikus from JP. Shout out. But I also have started writing flash fiction that I've been really excited about. And I'm also working on all these, comics and illustrations. And I feel like there's not enough hours in the day. I have so many things I want to do. I'm bursting. And in the past, I would have really shamed myself. Like, that's not okay. You got to choose a medium and stay there, right? That was what poetry was. I abandoned my whole early life. And I used to make zines in high school. That was my thing. So that was a mix of visual, different kinds of writing,
If you
interviews.
go on Caits' Instagram, there's like these fun throwbacks to images from these zines, which are amazing.
She's shown me. Yeah.
Alison Bechdel, come on now.
Yes, I did interview Alison Bechdel when I was 15 over email. I'm very proud of that still. And go Alison Bechdel, who was really
Seriously.
not, Fun Home. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hadn't come out yet. For years it didn't. But Dykes to Watch Out For was pretty popular at the time. And thank you for,
Shout out Lesbian Visibility Day was yesterday.
Oh, yeah. And thank you for indulging a 15-year-old Alison Bechdel.
And letting us know who to watch out for.
Yes, exactly. So, I think there's,
Well, I mean, I think the thing with Caits' book, which I think is important to talk about too, like as a publisher, and thinking about what it means to make space for hybrid work in the world, I think one of my reasons for going into making books for other people had to do with the fact that I didn't really see this happening, because the industry often is kind of milquetoast, it's frightened. It doesn't really understand its own changes. It's not really doing very well with big data. It's kind of freaking out about changes that are happening. And so, I think that in publishing, a lot of people for a long time were sort of what will sell, right? So it's sort of you're publishing things that are good. You're publishing people that you think will sell. You're publishing work that you think will sell. And again, a lot of that, just like with the bios, it's sort of what can people grab onto? What do they know?
Yeah, it's a very narrow definition of what will sell. It's like a whatever doesn't scare us into thinking maybe it won't sell.
Yeah. I mean,
and also sometimes common denominator too. How many
exactly.
people can relate to this? I sat down with a colleague who's a former agent who was like, so I could introduce you to people if you're interested in becoming an Instagram illustrator, because you could do that.
You could. I've told you that also.
But I don't want to.
I know you don't.
I can't do that. I just can't do it. And so, but that's what I think about too when you say it like that.
Because you would have
There's
to.
this popularity
You'd have to
right now.
mitigate what you were drawing. You think you wouldn't
Because
be able to just
all
do
that
whatever
stuff,
you wanted?
even though
You
truly
become this thing. It's like a fetish.
Yeah, well, and all of these illustration drawing Instagrams that have a little quote or a saying that are sort of safely radical sometimes,
Caits Rupi Kaur period.
Right. I mean, I just Ruby Kaur I'm not a fan of, but there are other people who are doing it less. I don't think they call it poetry, that I'm drawn to, with the aesthetic of. But then I noticed that there's an aesthetic that becomes what is the aesthetic of this time. And there always has been that, right? There's always been artist movements, but this doesn't feel so much like an artist movement as kind of a capitalistic, I don't know. I like this distilling down of major concepts that deserve more space and exploration into these bite-sized moments that I do believe help people sometimes, but it's just not my interest to distill down. So I could do it to become more palatable or more digestible or have more mass appeal. But
So I think that's the question, though. That's what I'm asking. Do you think it would change what your work was?
it would definitely
Yeah,
change what my work
yeah.
was, yes. And that's what my colleague was saying. I don't think that's you, but you could do it. If you wanted to, you have the skill for it. But I think
what
about...
does it involve? Would someone give you a prompt, draw this?
No,
or like something like
and-
that? Like, how does it work?
I mean, people, I think, just make their own stuff. They post it on Instagram.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
just make their own little drawing and saying. I mean, that's their creativity, but there's a similarity to it all.
It's an I mean it's an entrepreneurial thing as well, right?
Yes.
Because there's like all of these like aesthetic influencer type people who sort of like, you know, they use Instagram, Pinterest, like all the various sort of social media together as a platform. They have an Etsy, they sell their stuff online, they put it on t-shirts, whatever. Like if you're following something like Nathan Pyle, like the Strange Planet person, like who's, you know, it's like these alien things that like the aliens talk to each other about daily life, and like it, in the last month and a half it's blown up. There's like 1.2 million people, and there's like all this merch, you know. And it's like it's hitting a nerve, right? It's hitting a nerve. It's very digestible. It's like funny in a very specific way. There's like there's four lines on any one. It's like totally like, this is my funny today, I'm gonna walk away with this. But I think like, you know, and I think that there's a place for that, and like it has changed commerce in a way that I think helps the indie presses, right? Like it helps independent publishing. It helps, you know, the viability of self-publishing or community publishing as an actual commercial model, right? It helps in terms of that, and it makes it something that people are more used to happening. But I do think that in terms of like what we expect to get in terms of making things very like kind of palatable and well packaged, right? That's a different question, right? I mean,
I think that the operating system too has opened up space for the presses to take risks, because hybridity in form is now very cool, and it wasn't at all.
No.
So I think that, I don't know where I was going actually with the Instagram thing, so thank you for bringing it back around. But it seemed like it was in connection with this commitment to taking risks and seeing also the role of the publisher again as artist in process.
Yeah, that's we're the like quickly becoming the only people left that are doing that. Like, is the independent presses and stuff. You know, I think Big Five publishing only takes risks if those risky books the authors have already been proven in like a previous format. You know.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a lot of like the sort of, you know, selling the cult of personality, right? And I mean, then you're buying the person. I mean, which is why in the commerce of indie presses, even with small presses, people often, you know, have a pretty large Instagram platform, and people do take books from people because that human is saleable, not the work, the person. Right. I mean, and there's a lot now, and I mean, there has been like since kind of the advent of social media, like there's a lot of ways in which like the way individual artists or writers like build their personal platform that has a lot more to do with image, right? And like the cult of personality than it does that person's work. And I definitely know many people that I would say like have gotten many book contracts like and publish all the time, not necessarily because of the value of their work, but because they're like these kind of visible figures, literary sort of figures. I would say that that's true. I mean, but like for the OS, I mean, from the beginning, it's been really important for us to not, like, I've not taken books by people that people know intentionally, because I'm always sort of like, if this is going to get published, I don't care as much, you know, like this person doesn't need this, right? Whereas like more radical work that is not easily saleable, that is between genres, that is not in a form that you see very frequently, right? Or that is politically difficult or, you know, radical in some other way. I mean, I think that, you know, like kind of if you trace the history of like anything truly avant-garde, that is what it is, right? It is sort of like making space for things before they're palatable, right? And so whether it's curatorially or whether it's with a press or whether it's with music or dance or anything, I mean, it's really people who hold space for things before people understand what they are, right? I mean, in that, I think that history is really important to me. And I mean, I feel like sometimes what I make room for is almost more archive facing, right? Meaning like, I want the book to be in print and circulation. I want to make sure that it lands in all of these archives and libraries. But it doesn't matter if we don't make 10,000 of them, right? Because the existence of the book, changes the life of the practitioner, because the practitioner is able to utilize that as a stepping stone, right? I mean, I can tell you people like since having a book on the OS who've gotten a job, who've gotten tenure because they
or another book,
or you know, or gotten all these public appearances or whatever because of having something tangible. Because the book as an object is a very sellable concept professionally, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering when like because it does seem like one of the things I do worry about indie press is that. And I don't think this is bad, but like it can be kind of like a stepping stone. So Caits is eating the cheese.
I said I wasn't going to this time.
She's gonna eat the whole thing.
No, I
Yeah,
can't.
I literally will not let you ask.
Slap my hand away. I'll have a tummy ache. Okay, sorry, Brian. My cheese habit interrupted you.
We have like
That's
chronic illness woes, so like I will actually not let Caits eat the cheese.
You know what it will do.
That's what addiction is. It's like starting to affect me a lot. You know, like the people that you love. It's really
Yes. That's true.
But yeah, no, I like. I have mixed feelings about it, but I think people do not use indie presses as a stepping stone, but by virtue of publishing with an indie press, like they can go on to like some other opportunity. And I do hope that like in the future, like an author that says, "Oh, I publish with the operating system," and maybe they get like some notoriety or something and some recognition. It's really cool if you publish another book there, you know?
Well, that's very much like what we're working towards. I mean, if someone can publish a book with someone else and that other press can give them something that we can't give them in terms of like literal like money or resources,
publicity,
and we are like
that,
please go with my blessing, you know, like very good.
But that's the chicken and egg thing. It's like you're not going to be able to do that until you get that more notorious author to do another book, and then it's like, oh wow, they're there again, you know, which I think would be really cool.
But it's a very different thing for me because like even if you were to see our contracts, like our contracts literally have within them like if you are not someone who's interested in being part of something that's collective, understanding that every single other person here is a creative person. No one here is a staff, right? Like we are not people that work at HarperCollins who are editors and do not write, right? Like I mean, not to say that the people at HarperCollins weren't like, you know, people who hoped at one point they'd be writing, but like there is a professionalization of the publishing industry that I am not. I do not come from this. I taught myself all this stuff that I'm doing on my own, right? I mean, I think that you know, like in our transparent mission-driven work is that I want to transform the way that we think about publishing and the way that we think about resources and the way that we think about working in a radical community-oriented way. And I am not interested in trying to be a successful other press because I don't think that what they're doing is successful. Like I don't care. Like I never want to be that. Like I'm not trying to ever get there because I'm trying to teach people about what it means to be collective in the way that you work and use your resources. I want people to self-publish. Literally, like, I think that encouraging people to self-publish and teaching them how to self-publish and teaching them how to community publish and all of us supporting that and talking about how legitimate it is essential to the health of all of us as artists. Like, to try to pull people down for self-publishing is the most short-sighted, most like fear-driven thing I can imagine. Like, I think it's actually essential for presses to tell people that self-publishing is amazing, right? To give people that validity. Like, you know, if I'm right, because we are also artists. Yeah. No one is going to tell me that my painting is not ready for public consumption. I would be like, go, you know, whatever. I don't know if I can curse. Like, yes, but I can. Okay. So like, so, you know, so go fuck yourself, you know, like, I mean, like, it's kind of like what we do with books is very different, right? But I'm an artist. Like, I make artist books. I did for years. And when my artist book was done, it was done because I made it. Why is it different from when I'm putting text in it?
Well, I know how to design it. Challenging all the structures that capitalism put up. And, you know, and
it's new. Yeah. It's new. Those structures are new. We talk about them as like being traditional, like this is how it's always done, and now people are self-publishing. Like, that's ridiculous.
Right. But I love that challenge. But it does take it out of the conversation of even being able to compare it to other efforts. Not to say I don't think all other efforts are bad, but no. I love what you're doing in terms of just rethinking the structure, rethinking how we work together, how we think about it, and coming out of the punk rock DIY culture and the hip hop DIY culture, the cardboard breakdancing, start. I think to me that's a very attractive aesthetic, a way of being in conversation. Doesn't mean everything I ever do will be following that path, but I think there's so much teaching that comes from that too. I think there's a line on the website, the operating system website, or is it the Twitter? To call us just a press would hurt our feelings.
Something like that, yeah. There's a lot of stuff that says like we're a question, not an answer. It's like it's always posited itself that way. Like I've always been like, this is an organization, it is an idea, it's an experiment, it's an organism, it is, right? I mean, it was never like I knew exactly what I planned to do either. It was sort of like
that was my question, is like, it sounds like not that it's aimless at all, but there's no like end goal, right? It's just like,
I mean, there's many end goals. There just isn't one
there's
end
no
goal.
single end goal, which with the big press, the single end goal is to maximize.
Yeah, but the funny
profits.
thing is, like when you say big press, we did over 25 books this year.
Yeah.
Right? So like when
I'm talking about the big five.
No, I know,
really,
but like when we're talking about like when people say like, oh, like micro presses, I'm like, do you understand how many more books we're putting out than like many really, really well-funded small presses? We're doing like, we're doubling, tripling, quadrupling what other people are putting out with like way more finances, So, and a lot of that has to do with like how you create an efficient system and like how you, and thinking about economics in just like a totally different way and understanding technology and like thinking from the system level.
So to
Yeah,
speak.
I'm literally like, I also can't believe that we have done that. It's crazy. Like the numbers are crazy. Like we're at like 70 books or something now.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
How many years have you guys been up?
We started publishing books in 2013, but was only chapbooks, and it was 4.
And so obviously it's grown a lot. So yeah, 25 books this year.
Exponentially.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
But I also think that, I guess what you were talking about, big five, and like the end goal for all presses is not, I mean, your end goal is not just sales, obviously.
No, but we're not the big five though.
Right.
Big
That's
five,
why I was,
their end goal is profit.
So I was circling back to say that I realized that's what you meant.
That's why I keep harping on the fact that like, to me, that's why indie presses are so important. It's like, regardless of what your like internal mission is, it's like, I just don't think really like on the forefront, avant-garde, like experimental, whatever you call, like innovative work just should be in the hands of smaller presses that are trying to put out that work and are not as worried about the bottom line. That's to me what the most important thing is.
I mean, if that
because I think literary fiction it's like, if you don't fit into this spectrum, like of like, if you use the metaphor of like the color spectrum, like if you don't fit into like the ultraviolet, whatever it is, like that's it. Because like or the colors that everyone can see, like, you know what I mean? Like like it just should be everything, but it's not, and that's why I think it's so important. And I would not be upset if like they just gave up and started making textbooks, because I think it is our job at this point.
Textbooks are super unsustainable, actually. But I mean, I think
cookbooks. I don't know. Whatever makes them their money.
I think for me though, right, like to say that like indie presses are the places where it happens, like what does that mean? Who runs them? Like most indie presses are ultimately unsustainable because they are still top-down organizations. They don't take a lot of time to build in like a functional systemic infrastructure that can be replicated. There isn't a lot of time spent on creating mechanisms, systems, like...
Our producers are signing a question right now, that our producers would like asked, which is, what does that look like? What does that infrastructure look like that maybe a bigger press would have, or whatever.
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily know if the bigger presses have it either, but I mean, I think that's something that you see happening a lot is like people decide that they're going to start a press, and it is based on 1 or 2 people running that press, and that person has all of the intelligence personally, and then when that person burns out or runs out of money or whatever it is that brought them to it, then it's over. It's over. There is no systematizing. There is no like passing down that intelligence. There is no like, what I've been doing in the last couple of years is I'm like trying to mine my own process so that I have it all on paper so that I can hand it to someone else and be like, this is what it means to run our Poetry Month series, which this year and last year was run by other people, which I ran for like the first 6 years, but now I don't have to anymore. But the reason that that's possible, and then the other person can train that other person, right? It's sort of like, I don't want what we've done to be reliant on me, right? I want it to be an infrastructure that not only can happen here, but that someone else can take and start somewhere else. Like, I don't even want it to just be the operating system. Like, the whole idea was always to be like, what does it mean to be able to produce these things for ourselves? Which is why I said, like, ultimately for me, it is self-publishing, because we are ourselves the community, and we are publishing ourselves and saying, like, it doesn't... You know what I mean? We don't need to wait for someone else's permission to do that, right? Who is a different legitimizing body. But then you become a legitimizing body and it's a joke, right? Which is like why I continually try to draw attention to that rather than deflect, right? I think that a lot of people deflect that attention. You're like, oh, like... It isn't funny that someone became credible because I put a name on this thing that I started in my living room and then made myself business cards on the internet and became a thing. And then you started treating me like a thing, and people would send me emails being like, can someone at the operating system do this? And I was like, someone is literally like me or my cat. Like, that's the whole, there's no one else here. It's me at 2 o'clock in the morning, like doing this after my 2 other jobs. You know what I mean? But it's this legitimizing organ. And rather than kind of pretending that isn't what's happening, I want to draw attention to be like, it's ridiculous.
Well, and explode it a little bit, because...
And explode it, yeah.
And I think
explode what exactly? Which part needs to be...
Explode the idea of the becoming a legitimizing body.
Oh, yeah.
Like, now you're an authority on what is cool and good, or whatever.
Exploding the idea that that's necessary? Is that what you're saying? Or
exploding the idea that that's even happening, that even needs to be celebrated. And I think, you know, and I think about the idea of creating blueprints a lot in terms of my day-to-day work, not in art. Well, in art, but at pen, and thinking about some of the more experimental things we're doing, and how do we create a map for other people to do it in their city or wherever, because of the exact same idea of this knowledge sharing and being able to, I mean, it's always better for more people to be doing great things in the world. But I think that this legitimizing thing that then gets turned back around on you after you get a little shine, I mean, there's no escaping it really because of the way our society is set up and structured. But
well, that's also tough to avoid, and I'm having trouble reconciling the idea that if you do something that people like, they are going to put you somewhat on a pedestal and legitimize you, you know? So I'm trying to think about how...
But I think that
that would get leveled out, how that would get smoothed out.
I don't know that it does in our society, and I think about this.
I don't know, but I mean, does it? How does it in general? You know,
I don't
like if people start to like your books and like what you're doing, you're gonna create something that people think is legitimate. You know.
Well, I think the thing is like making it apparent that process has happened and that it sort of doesn't have absolute value. Yeah. Right? Like,
or it's not like a superpower. It's like,
no, it's not a superpower, but also that it's available for everyone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing for me is like, and I think this with art as well, like the sort of muse myth is old. Right? Like a lot of art is work, right? It's labor, it's practice, it's process, it's planning, it's, you know, it's discipline. And, you know, and so is this legitimizing thing, right? It's kind of like you too can make a press in your living room and call it something and give it a platform, you know? I mean, and it will be just as legitimate and also just as illegitimate as anything else. Mm-hmm. Nothing has absolute legitimacy. Nothing like actually has value. We grant it value, and just kind of like, and I think for me, part of it is just kind of saying like, don't let someone tell you that what you have value doesn't have value because it didn't go through that system. It literally doesn't matter. It does not exist. It's, I mean, you know, go back to the language thing, right?
Yeah,
like the United States does not exist. Right? It's an invention. We drew it on a map.
Oh my God, this is going to be like the millionth time that I brought this up. Have you ever heard of an author called Yuval Noah Harari?
No.
He's this Israeli dude. He's this like, I would say he's a historian. but he's very unconventional and at the same time like entirely logical.
Mm-hmm.
And
What has he written?
He's written *Sapiens*.
Oh yeah, my dad's obsessed with him.
It's great.
My dad is obsessed.
I mean,
with
he's
all
a
of his
genius.
books. Yes,
He's a
and
genius.
I have them on my list.
What
to
you're
read.
talking, what you're talking about
good books.
is like
that's
what we label. But the thing is, I guess like my question is based off this. His thesis in his first book, *Sapiens*, is that humans basically evolved past other animals because we were able to create language and fiction, especially. These borders that we have, they're all fictitious. Money is fictitious. Our whole society is based on laws that are not real. They're just something that we agree on, right? Yeah. So I don't know. I really don't know the specific question I want to ask there. I guess it is that how if we are kind of like almost like biologically based on this, like, you know, this like need to like have these symbols. How would we get around them?
Well, you don't get around them.
No,
you shift what they are.
You become empowered by naming them as named, right? When you
what happens to a self-published book? I guess let's say like
you mean like *Leaves of Grass*.
I've never heard of that.
Walt Whitman.
Oh, Walt Whitman. Yeah.
Right. I mean, what I'm saying is like
in the modern day.
No,
like,
but the point is that is the modern day. Like, I mean, it's like 100 years ago. I mean, like things that are now canonical were mostly self-published until literally 30 years ago. So I mean, it's just kind of like, but we talk about it as if there is no value and as if that isn't.
Well, there's a different way there for Walt Whitman, for him to be known, or some of those people that weren't known until we picked them up later, you know? People do have a drive to have their work read. So how is that reconciled with like?
Well, I think that the idea too is that
what is everyone's goal? I guess what should be their goal.
Well, what do you mean? But there shouldn't be one goal,
right?
Who's to say that everybody has the same goal? My primary mode of working, and I don't know if Caits is the same. I mean, my primary mode of working is first of all like reprogramming, deprogramming, like understanding my body as like a human, like
you're talking about
evolutionary organism. Yeah,
you use the word hacking.
Yeah,
I'm curious how you apply that to your life.
Because I'm like body hacking all the time. Like every single one of us is walking around like an incredibly conditioned person. Like you know, like dealing with ideas of ourselves and each other and what we're seeing in the world and what we're seeing in school and how we deal with our families and how we deal with our partners. I mean, it's all literally conditioning, and
which means the story is all rewritable that we've agreed upon.
If you recognize that you are, right? And so if you recognize that you are conditioned, and you recognize that like, oh, I've always called myself a woman, but what is that? What does that mean, right? I mean, like that literally doesn't have a meaning. Like, and it didn't have the same meaning 100 years ago, or it doesn't have the same meaning in another country, but it's literally, that's the only thing I've ever thought of that as meaning. And so when I say that word, I hear these associations, right? So like, how do you hack yourself out of thinking those associations when you hear that word, right? How do you hack yourself out of thinking that you have to get someone else to publish you in order for your book to have value? Like all of this work, like that's my primary work. And then it's sort of like, okay, I feel like I have the ability as a teacher, as an artist, to help other people see that, right? I mean, I think that I love that word representation as an art term, because when I represent something, I offer them to a different person's senses, actually, kind of channeled through the way that I saw them. And so that person has the opportunity to re-see or re-perceive something the way I represented it. And they might be able to see the world in a new way because I did that, and therefore self-hack themselves, like their own experience in the world. And I think that is like immensely powerful, which is why, you know, fascist countries are like so controlling of what we make.
Of course, and why art is dangerous. And we're seeing that more and more in our era with Trump, that it actually is the truth, because it shakes up those narratives. And I think biologically we are driven to obviously create fictions all around us. But who's created the fictions? Obviously, we know the historically white men. So all of these things are, I think,
everybody really.
Well, yeah, true. Everybody,
myths, fictions,
of course, yes. But the ones we're talking about in America right now, in terms of the conversation we're having,
sure, yeah.
And I think that there's just possibility. And I'd be inauthentic if I told you that if a big press came knocking on my door, I wouldn't publish with them. I sure as hell would.
In 5 seconds.
Of course, because of course I want my work to be read and to reach an audience. But I think that it's not about...
Caits and I would both take Oprah in 5 seconds.
That's right. I'll put that on my book. I'd be
We're
proud.
on.
Listen, but I think that the practice of it and the art experiment of it that you're talking about, you know, this is a question, this is an experiment versus a press, is not to say that everything needs to become what we're doing, but we're putting questions into the world. And I think about that a lot in the prison and justice space, where it's like, you know, the goal is that we have something that doesn't look at all, it's not called prison, and is much better for humans across the board. That is beyond so many people's imagination, sometimes even beyond mine. Shamefully, I'm working on it. Not that I'm about prison, but that it's hard for me to get there in my imagination around what else could it be. And I think that we need people who can see that imagination, and that's their role, is to push that, even if I'll never see it in my lifetime. So I think it's the same thing with art. It's questioning what we've been taught to believe as truth, what we value. Even when we're walking over, you're talking about, you know, self-value, and what do we base that on? Our productivity, the way we look often in the world. These are all things that are deeply ingrained in all of us. So in a similar way, I mean, it's a philosophy on some level too, really. A philosophy in action. So asking great questions, which literature does too. So I think it's less of a question of like, what does that actually look like? Because, you know, we could say it looks like a commune or something, but we also have seen some commune experiences. If you watched, what's it called? Wild Wild?
Oh, yeah.
What's it?
Wild 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 Country.
Woo!
Fucking great.
It's an amazing documentary.
Oh, my God.
But crazy.
But
Yeah.
really intense, right? And humanity just happens on that land in a really intense way. And I think that, you know, part of the practice is not, you know, we're all complicit in the world of capitalism. If you buy dish detergent, boom, there you go, right? Mm-hmm. If you live on the grid on any level, you can't live off the grid.
I was just talking about this yesterday. So I am a big fan of The Good Place.
I've been hearing I've said just random shit. I can't even remember what I said to prompt it, and then people have been like, "Have you seen The Good Place?"
Well,
apparently, it's a show I should watch.
I think that there's a
Yes.
real fascination right now. I mean, always with myth, but specifically with like what happens after we die and morality. There's like a whole sort of little bevy of shows about this.
Does it take place in heaven or something? Is that like what the show is?
I mean, I'm not going to, no spoilers,
Yes.
hashtag no spoilers, but like, so, I mean.
in the afterlife.
In the afterlife. So like The Good Place
so
is
it's like it's in,
The Good Place is heaven, but there's also the bad place.
Okay. Yeah.
But so just briefly, like Ted Danson plays like this like kind of reformed person from the bad place who's like learning certain things, and like there's an issue where like people aren't getting into the good place anymore. And he's like trying to convince the people from the bad place that like there's a reason that no one gets in anymore. And he says something, and I think it's really interesting. He says, you know, it's really different to be a human now. And he said something that I think about a lot. Like, you want a berry. You want to eat berries. So
Always.
like, always, me too. I always want to eat berries. But like, we don't have like, you don't go outside and there's like berries growing and you can just pick them, because we've gone to private property. So probably they're on someone's property. You can't have it, right? So private property has been introduced. Few of us have room to grow them. And so if you want to get a berry, you have to go to the store. What store are you going to go to? What are the ecological and ethical practices of that store? What are the ecological and ethical practices of the people growing the berries? How do they treat their pickers, right? None of us should be eating Driscoll's. Driscoll's is basically like picked by slaves, but I do.
Well,
and
of course
it's
you do,
fucking terrible,
because
but
who can afford it? And that cycles right
so
back.
I had a subscription to Butcher Box because, you know, I can't stand eating like factory farmed animals. And yeah, it got to the point where I just couldn't afford it anymore, and it sucked. I hated making that decision.
And
it was that or group therapy.
And of course, there are wide swaths of people in the U.S. who can't even think on that level, right? You look at food deserts in the South Bronx, where there's people are living off of Cheetos. I mean,
shit food. Yeah.
So I think it's all part of the same conversation, and it doesn't mean you're not going to go buy the berries down the store. You know, it is what it is. Here we are. But I think that reimagining in extreme ways, which is also creativity, creates possibility, and is also exciting.
yeah. I mean, in the last couple of years, like the body hacking thing, like I've done a lot of work around, like it took, Caits and I have both like dealt with like chronic illness stuff, and like it took me a really long time to unpack like where my chronic illness was coming from. And for a lot of people, chronic illness actually is coming from trauma. Like we are now understanding, you say you're like looking at neurology stuff, like the ways in which, like, especially
recently, I've been, I'm like kind of preparing for this essay I'm trying to write.
So I write a lot about embodied cognition and like how the brain and the body are the same thing. And, you know, so I've been writing and doing workshops for the last couple of years, like really helping people understand like how trauma lives in the body. And how, like, being in a culture that is what you would call bio-precarious, right? Bio-precarity being, like, you're constantly aware that, like, your body is in some kind of danger, that, like, you are actually, like, physically, like, involved in the precariousness of your life. So, like, we in the United States have really severe bio-precarity because of what we've done to insurance, right? So, like, if you know that, like, if something happened to you or your job, that, like, not only would you probably lose your house, but like none of your family could get health care, your parents, your kids, like you. Like if anyone was to get sick, you might all become homeless and bankrupt in like a day. Like, I mean, it's these levels of like how close you are to being really in danger puts us in a sense of like panic, which creates
the amygdala fight or flight is constantly
you're
on.
in fight or flight. So like people are in survival mode way higher up into sort of like the 1% versus 99% that we would think, right? Like people, it's not like that is such a true condition and such a close condition for so many people.
It takes up a lot of cognitive resources.
It takes up a lot of cognitive resources, but but the thing is, it's not only poverty.
It's not
like you say poverty, but it's not poverty. Like actually the decision making factors for so many people about the way that they work and why they work and where they work and why they're making those decisions because of this looming danger, which is so close because so little of these things are actually taken care of. And so like we feel really responsible for taking certain kinds of jobs and doing certain kinds of work and, you know, and being safe. Right, making safer decisions, not taking risks, not taking personal risks, not taking social risks, not angering our parents, right? Not, you know what I mean? And this works in so many ways. I mean, and I think that, you know, for creative people, a lot of creative people often like leave creative work because it is very, it feels irresponsible.
There's not enough security or whatever. Yeah, it
feels irresponsible, right? And so I think a lot of what I've been thinking about it in the last couple of years in terms of that is it's sort of like helping people understand like where it is that they've gotten the feeling that like making art is irresponsible and that making art is like, you know, something that is only for people who have a certain amount of money or is like would be something that if they did it, it would actually potentially put themselves in danger, put their families in danger. I think that's very real for people. And some of that has to do with being stuck in the infrastructures that we have. If you are a writer and you have kids and you have a job, let's say you're a teacher, right? I've been teaching for like a really long time. I make very little. I'm on Medicaid, right? Like just is. But you have a job, you have a great education, you have student loans, you have all this stuff, you have a book. You think your book is great. You submit it for how long? How many places do you submit it? What does it cost? What do you think the average is? People tell me all the time, they're like, I submitted this for 2 years, I spent $3,000. Tons of time.
Yeah.
So much time. So much effort. So much emotional effort.
Can relate.
Can relate.
So can I.
But guess what? Like, what if you didn't do that and you and your friends like started a press instead?
Which is what
I did.
Which is what I did.
What you did.
That's literally what we did. And yeah, I mean, it would be nice if it had started. I'll admit that personally, me looking back, I'm like, I'm kind of glad I did go through that adversity, but I have a completely different life experience. I have a lot more security than a lot of other people. And so I don't think it's the same thing. I think I was worried strictly about the book. It wasn't like, oh, I need this book to be published, or else X, Y, and Z might not happen. Like, you know,
think
it was just me dealing with adversity on a more personal level, and so that's why I kind of do value it a little bit, even though, you know, fuck it, I hate suffering.
But you also learned something about those numbers and about that process that now you can bring to bear on other people's.
So I'm a good I was a good guinea pig for that experiment because, like, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong, I suffered, but like it wasn't life or death, like, you know, where it didn't feel like that bio-precarity or, you know, what you were saying, you know. But yeah, I can totally relate to what you're saying. It's difficult. And also I'm really bad at doing this. But I do think like if for a lot of people it's like, oh, I'm either going to be an artist or I'm not. It's like it doesn't have to be that binary. Like you can write, you can start. I started actually. You know
Down
what?
with all the binaries.
I'm actually not that bad at this. I'm not that bad at this. I actually started writing, and I really didn't try to get anything published for years and years and years. But in the back of my mind, I didn't know that. Like I was like, oh, okay, I do want to get published, you know. But at the same time, like no, I moved to Seattle. I did nothing but sit down for 3 hours every day and just write. It wasn't about anything. It was about like just
Sounds wonderful.
living, like being alive. No, like, literally anything. And then sometimes I would write a story or like I worked on a couple novels and like, you know, but like, yeah, no, I mean like, I think just some of it's impatience, but I think it is a lot driven by our society. It's like, no, I need to be doing something productive that makes money. Like that's it. Like that's what I need to be doing.
For me, the idea of like getting stuff rejected has always like I think I'm just an efficiency person, and so I'm like this is incredibly inefficient. Like I know that like as just like a logical person, like as that like whatever right brain left brain which side left that part of me
I think
it's left right
it's left
I don't know
I can never
I thought it was right.
Oh boy, well we're doing great. No, but the part of
we've been reading
like,
up on the brain. Trust me, we
exactly.
got it.
But like the part of it that's like. I think about what I could do today, and I'm like, well, I could send this thing out. Literally 99%, it's not going to get accepted.
Yeah.
Or I could spend the time doing something else, and literally, I always choose the something else because why? Because like I mean, literally, it is actually very challenging for me to submit things places. I've been trying in the last couple of years because I'm like, come on, just do it. But like,
well, I always try to create a boundary for it. I have this amount of time. And that's all I'm spending on it.
I also just don't feel like I don't know what to say to like what's the right thing to say in like a query or like in a something. I follow the instructions, but like honestly, it wasn't until Katie started helping me that I really started getting things published.
Well, I mean, I think that honestly, a lot of people like they're just going into it to publish their work. They're not sending it to places that they like and are following and they're reading and they like what that person is doing and they really like what that press is doing and they can have an intelligent conversation about like the meaning of that publication, right? Like, which is, I think, what a lot of people want to see in a query letter is not that you're like there to publish your work, but that you are engaging into what is essentially a dialogue with the intentions of that publication and, you know, like in a really meaningful way.
I have a good question based off that.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of writers out there who, you know, maybe they do want to get published, but they don't have the time to like, you know, like I know journals that I like, even ones that I've not gotten published in, like Guernica or something like that, you know. But like, if you don't have the time to read all of these, but you do want to publish, like, what should you do? I mean, you can then make the time, but like,
well, at least read an issue.
It just feels difficult, you know, especially for people that just, you know, have a lot of shit going on.
Well,
and, like,
you can't read everything in the world. It's
yeah,
true,
right.
For example, at AWP, I went and bought issues of magazines that I had been admiring vaguely from afar, but wanted to get to know a little more intimately. Now, I just got one issue each, but then I can deep dive and see what it's about.
Yeah.
And that
Guess
some
what?
of them,
you
I'm like,
might also learn that you do not want to be in it.
Exactly.
Well, and that's the other thing. It's like
You
once
may find that you were wrong.
and there's a lot of other problems. It's like even if you do want to be in it, it's like the chances still are you're not going to get picked. The chances are you're still going to get rejected. You know, so like deep diving into magazines or journals, you know, literary editorials, like it could just be endless.
yeah, and I think
and you might,
to,
and like you go through so many, like 100, let's say out of those 100, you'd like 7, you know, that you really think fit your work or something like that.
But
you know?
what's the point of publish? I mean, you know, sometimes I'll get a poetry book that every single poem has been published already. I'm like, wow, I could have just read this whole collection online. There's nothing left for me to discover.
Oh, that's not true. I disagree with that totally.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Say why?
Well, just
I want Caits to finish what she was saying.
well, sometimes what I wonder.
I thought there was going to be a staring contest for
Well,
a
no,
little bit. I was going to let that happen too.
Sometimes, well, I think there's still a collection. I think there's a lot of value in putting things behind covers, putting things in a collection. The curation of it, all of that has another layer of the art. But I think that what it makes me think of is the kind of obsession towards publishing for legitimacy. It kind of circles back to that original question we have. And then it becomes a rat race. And then it becomes really feeding into the meritocracy and who's the gatekeeper.
But it's not a meritocracy. That's the problem.
But I feel like there's also something that has to do with like visibility and access and redundancy. Like we're in a time of like the signal to noise ratio is like bananas, right?
Yeah.
So like anything you put out in the world, the likelihood that someone's going to see that is like,
Yeah, and the more you see someone's name.
yeah. So if you have 20 poems out, like each one of those is, who knows who's even going to see it? I mean, they go into these different sort of parallel universes, and they each time a new thing kind of like hits the pond, like there's ripples out, and it may reach a different person, and you having seen that one poem, like may then when you see that person's book, like you'll buy the book and then you'll read everything else in the collection.
That's totally right.
I think about it as this very sort of synaptic sort of nerve net, like where people are coming in from all these different places, but the likelihood that that one person read all of those poems in all those different places is extremely low to me. Like I think like each of those poems like becomes its own kind of like searchlight, like finding different audiences.
I see that.
Yeah.
I see that.
I mean,
I
and
get
then
that.
for me, like if I did like that person's poem when I read it, I only got to read maybe one or two, whatever was in the collection. And then if I really like their work, sitting with that poem again in relationship to the rest of their collection is a totally different experience in which I get to like see that poem or those poems with their practice, like as part of a larger practice.
You're totally right. You're totally right. But I think, and maybe it was a bad example, but I think what I was trying to get at is your question, Brian, about reading 50 million literary mags. Well, nobody can, and then you hop on with the saying who actually is reading it. What's the likelihood somebody is reading it? What's published? And I think, and certainly I'm not anti-publication. I also want my work to be read. I also have journals that I love. I also don't read every single one under the sun either, or even every issue of the same ones that I like, right in a row. Well, no, nobody has time. And also there's a million fucking books you want to read in the world, as well. But I think I think the question of what motivates the seeking publication is probably also a helpful one to ask, because I think when I think about people who publish constantly or who put a lot of effort into that, maybe they just want to get their work read, sure. And also, but there's the validation piece of it, I think is something to be examined. As an internal practice, what's my drive to publish constantly?
I also often feel like there's a privilege related to that, because like having the ability to continually submit means that you have some sort of resource. I mean, like time, money for submission fee is like, and I think that it kind of reminds us that like people are not coming from an even playing field.
Yeah. One more question, because our producers are signaling for a reading. I'm curious because both of you guys said you'd put that Oprah sticker on a book, or like you'd go to a big press. What would that do for you?
Well, I think, one, the potential of a really wide readership. So when earlier you were saying, well, isn't the goal to be read? I'm like, oh, sure. I mean, some people's goals are different, I'm sure, but that is one of my personal goals. I would like my work to be in relationship with other people, and certainly resources and time. I mean, with money and resources comes the ability to relieve other kinds of work that I no longer may have to do in order to pay my rent or the freelance jobs I take on, So I think those are two reasons for me why it's attractive, obviously. But I do also imagine myself to be, should I ever be so lucky, that if I were to be in that position, there'd be other projects that were not big five projects. So I'm interested in existing in multiple spaces too.
Yeah, I think so. I think you totally hit the nail on the head. Like, it's really about like possibility, like what it opens up. I mean, I think that there can be a certain type of snobbishness where people are sort of like, oh, I would never want to like be that commercial, or I would never want to kind of like be associated with something that was like that kind of mainstream. Like the idea of being mainstream is somehow like antithetical to like being radical, right? But I don't think that has to be the case, right? And so, like, if it were to be, like, I would not assume that if you or I, if Caits or I were to get there, that we'd have done so because we, like, sold ourselves down the river and wrote some, like, totally tepid, like, romance novel, right? If we got there, it would be because someone at that level who's, like, is ready to sign on to, like, what we're doing. And if that is happening, then give me that platform, right? Like, what an incredible gift to be able to, like, reach so many people. And that kind of visibility gives you all of these possibilities. Like, if I got that, like, the number of people who would then give to my nonprofit would be, like, through the roof. I would never have to worry about people giving to my nonprofit because I'd have that kind of visibility. And once you have that kind of visibility, then people are ready to give to you, you know? And so, it doesn't mean that it would have any more value, but people would think that it did. And I'd be willing to take that. And I would talk about it, right? It's sort of like, when you get that, do you talk about it, right? Do you now say, oh, I got this because I'm a genius? Or do you say, like, it is totally luck that I got this, and there's a million people who should get this, and here is how I'm going to share the wealth in some way, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the situation is that this is the society we live in, and like there's a former Facebook exec who has a couple good videos about how, like, his philosophy is, like, the only reason I'm trying to get money is so I can set up different systems, you know, better systems. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, it becomes one of those things where it's like, it's kind of analogous to the whole, like, kind of gender conversation. It's like, if you put the conversation within the realm of the binary conversation or the old conversation, then how can you ever really change it? So I'm still kind of, like, trying to reconcile that in my head. It's like, okay, if you're constantly trying to attain so that you can change, do you not sort of sustain the system that was there? I don't know. I don't think I'm smart enough to understand it.
No, I think in some way you do. And that's what I was saying about the dish detergent, that there's actually no way to be fully off the grid, and all of us are going to make sacrifices in our ethics depending on the resources we have at the time, depending on a lot of factors. But I think it's about right back to asking questions, making choices, having the conversations about your choices.
What do you do with your platform, right? I mean, like, if you look at someone like Jada Pinkett Smith, right, who is, like, using her platform to, like, have these incredible conversations, like, with her grandmother and her child and, like, all of these guests, and, like, putting it on the internet, and, you know, is sort of like, let's have these public conversations. Great. Yes. Like, way to go using your celebrity, like, for something like that, right?
Yeah. And despite the fact that I said I had trouble reconciling it, I do think it is the way to go. And I do think like, I have a little bit more optimism about capitalism. Like, I do think it is at some point, I hope, going to turn into a more, like, philanthropic capitalism situation. But, you know, we'll see. And this is kind of like,
you gotta hold the hope for this table, my friend.
What's that? Yeah.
You gotta hold all the hope for this table.
I'm literally not even opening my mouth. It's too much.
I think it's possible. I think it's very possible. I think it's one of those things where, like,
I'm entrepreneurial, but I wouldn't use the word capitalism. I think sometimes, like,
I mean,
I think the word,
it wouldn't be, you know,
it's problematic.
Capitalism, you think, is problematic?
No, the word capitalism, and, like, we don't have another word to talk about, like, what
money
like,
system that
what it would be,
a different system,
because we can't, because if we had the word, we'd know what it was. So and that's why philanthropic capitalism is the best way I can put it. But, like, it's
very top down.
I mean, it's. We'll see.
I mean, that's
a whole other conversation.
I'm like, a lot of thoughts about funding.
Oh my god.
Okay, well, let's do some readings.
We won't drag you down that road.
Yeah, let's do some readings. It is an interesting conversation. Maybe another day.
Okay, so I guess I was thinking a lot about the evolutionary stuff, and so I have this piece. Caits has heard this probably, the Memory of Feasible Grace. This is a long piece.
When I hear it versus title.
It's not super long. It's a piece that was sort of inspired by Paolo Soleri, who's an Italian architect who did a lot of sort of visionary thinking, and who had this kind of idea. He thought a lot about evolution, and so I was asked to do a poem about place, and so I made this sort of longer piece about sort of what it meant to evolve in a city versus elsewhere. The whole poem is footnoted. So you can go and find it, like, on my website, but I'm not going to read any of the footnotes. I'm just going to read the poem. So it's called In Memory of Feasible Grace. I am the urban mutant, inextricable from this place, 4 generations before me, strap hanging when there were straps, Piecework and factory wages in this teeming, seething anthill, where bodies exposed to high temperatures become diamonds if they survive, visible only if you get far enough away. We are knit of the same fabric, its materials, my materials, its pressures, my native tongue, but the city too is not itself, was never a thing. And so you cannot be the city, even though you are. Since you cannot be the city, you cannot be. Just don't think too hard about it and just keep moving. If you're lucky, a trickster god will get you a good deal on a place in Brooklyn. Not far from train, bathroom, and hall, cozy, good light. Good credit only, no guarantors. Nice girls only, please. Haha, just kidding, except not. Except we are serious. Except read between the lines. No one really puts what's happening on paper here. Anyone with power learns that early. If your parents never had any, good luck with that. There's no distribution center. Just figure out how you need to dress, what armor you need where to pass unnoticed, taking furious notes. Sometimes passing unnoticed means your clothes will be loud. These are not the same silences. Survival is the hottest game in town. Every awning says, original raise. Yes, the signs can say, best pizza, even though it isn't, you're catching on. Surprisingly, sometimes the best way to camouflage oneself is to stick with the herd. Uroplatus gecko, willow ptarmigan, toad, common barren caterpillar, stone flounder, great patoo, katydid. In the insect world, things are often not what they seem, especially if you're a hungry predator. For 250 million years, insects have survived because they often appear to be something other than what they really are. Is it a bug, a twig, or a leaf? Is that butterfly the bitter-tasting one or the delicious one that resembles it? Here we are, the Thracian girl laughing when we thought we would be the philosopher, but fuck who wants to be down a well. Look at the stars alone in your room on your phone so that no one sees you falter. Cry because they shine so brightly. Whisper their names under your breath or louder if you can stand it. Eridani, Akamar, Cassiopeia, Ain, Alathfar, Lucida Apidi, brightest of the town. Sing a song to Ursa Major, Arundhati, Alcor, Suha, the neglected one. The shards of Arabic on your tongue, mispronounced, as unfamiliar as these galaxies, and yet as comforting. The city sits on top of the city, which sits on top of the city, which sits on top of the city, and it cannot ever not be a collision, a sordid density where dream calls itself a power bottom. And sometimes it is, sometimes it actually enjoys it, sometimes amongst the shut-eyed abandon, sometimes it remembers itself a dream, and sometimes my fallible body believes in love.
Wow. I'm going to go back and read that on the website with the footnotes now.
There's so many,
I can't wait.
There's so many comments. The whole thing about the Thracian girl and the philosopher.
I can't wait. See? Surprise.
Surprise.
I'm always looking for it. Okay. I decided to read these prose notes. I don't know. They're not exactly connected to the conversation we've been having, but they feel in the world of. So this is Notes on Instinct. A documentary came out in 2014 that exposed the plight of orca whales. Their sheer mass a form of hypnosis, disbelief that such a body could exist on the same planet as our own. With a hypothesis of a higher emotional capacity than humans, who could blame the beast for dragging the trainer through the water, the friend who fed fish for tricks, who created a sideshow? Can one both love this beautiful, breathing thing and also be an accomplice to captivity? Is it better to fight for the whale from outside the arena or pet its wet skin from within the tank? When Ming the tiger was kept in the home of Antoine Yeats in New York City housing projects, his owner became a brief celebrity on television. He was quoted urging his peers to pursue PhDs, to see themselves on the quote-unquote next level of working with animals as an answer to his own misguided propensity for exotic pets. Alligator in the bathtub, Albino monkeys under the sink, elephants in the creek, Lambert the lion escaping through suburban traffic, that last one true down to name. Saw on the news that Cecil the lion was killed by a Midwestern dentist in Zimbabwe. I imagined Cecil rising from the dead under that pink fluorescent sun, a ring of roses strung through his mane, puttying up the potholes, redistributing land, restoring economics, wiping away blood with his sandpaper tongue. Cecil pumped up with laughing gas, cracking up at his own name. I won't lie, it is easier, lazy even, to assign a purity to a species that does not bear our particular flaws, alive by instinct, lacking ability to craft a gun from wood and metal or cook food above a constructed flame. When I look across my country, I have to fight the urge to hate all of us equally. I reach deep inside to what is untouched in me in search of compassion for the form in which I arrived. But who will ever know? The lion does not choose its human name. The whale cannot speak to claim self-defense. Ming's claws become enormous when a man's hand holds on.
Ooh.
Excellent. Those are both really great.
Are we just gonna do one more,
Thank you.
or are we done?
One more?
One more? Be a long episode. Who cares?
Cut it out if you need to later. I won't be
This is
offended.
the unedited version, like with
Yeah.
On Being. There's like
Yes,
the long one.
you're right.
I like to listen to the long one.
I never have. Is it worth
Oh
it?
yeah, it's good.
Okay.
This is a newer one, and I think you'll hear a lot of the themes that we were talking about. It's called Adieu. In the smallest box where quiet lives is the sacred animal called body. Stripped naked and awash in tearful wonderment, edges indistinguishable. Here is divinity without retort. The infinite humming of which I am subatomic signal knows itself mistranslated, bullied by inadequate dictionaries for whom it has nothing but compassion. Each iteration in form or passing folded into its exponential experimentations, countervalent reboots, imperceptible waking dreams. Each timeline a gestural recommendation of phrase. What to do with a knowing whose groundwater relies on the invisible? What to do with milfoy synthetic space-time mesh frames with definitions refusal, with the fearful insistence of the mundane that so often requires our silencing? They closed the book on prophets as though spirit and its messengers were a thing with beginning and end, forgetting they'd written the story themselves, as though any of this could be linear. As if between them and they two were only solid objects, as if the unseen was not only not available, but inadmissible, finite, and exhausted, by the few familiar, meager graspings that remain to a public whose daily audience with the ineffable becomes so muddied as to be unrecognizable. The leaks in the firmament cannot be trusted. Their days are so dense with required forgetting. Prophet is not a useful word as such, for everyone is and was and isn't and wasn't. As all post-mortem directional hagiography, these words are written by those who came later, these markers driven into the soil by those who identified the stakes. We persist. Amaranthine questionings and fugitive forms, offerings of an organism learning and relearning its plurality. Chord, kipu, calculus, brief orbital returns before further forgettings. It will all be over as over hasn't yet begun. This version is being redrawn as you speak, your character not playing out the way it was imagined. You woke up on a different path, unaware. You are history's memory. You are plant's idea of what comes next. You are machine intelligence. You are quasar plinth rarefaction. More breath than bone, more song than flesh, more bird than breast. Your sadness can only ever be a signifier, cosign to unfolding. Call me mountain, joyful, and I will know to sing communion.
I feel like the poem I'm going to read it's not exactly in conversation, but it sits in the same world, so I'm pleased by this. And because of all of our talk about edges, which appeared in your poem, this is called Notes on Edges and Other Notes. And also, Brian, this is for you because of your interest in addiction. I wrote it when I was working at a needle exchange.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
When do you feel most alive? Even those who do not have a nameable passion can understand the feeling of time stopping. Depending on the safety of the space, I can offer the example, what about orgasm? True, heads nod. I stop being whatever I am, transmute simple energy. It's a good writing exercise. What do you become in that moment? A glowing crystal ball, all-knowing. Come on, you can get more interesting than that. My grandpa's pipe smoke, the growl of midnight badger, a funk bass line pulsing below a buried coffin, banging on the walls of a mitochondrial cell you thought I was going to say concrete. A tin can rattling an electric solo through the string. Now we're talking. The first draft isn't that important. We call it shitty just to lower the stakes enough to fill the page without fear. But revising is where the magic's at, of course. Especially the removal of context to save your ass from anyone who can flip fiction to truth. There are levels of desperation in this need. Sometimes it's just to be kind. But when you write to paper because there is no one to trust, the magic trick is encoded language, to narrate without the cold reveal. Women who miss privacy also miss fucking understandably. When I make love, I am no longer a woman. I can be anyone from anywhere. My breasts are ripe melons or they disappear, sunken like collapsed ant holes. I can fit myself into a vaginal cavity. I can expand a cannon. Alien or angel, I'm not of this earth. Everyone brags about how they could make you come or how somebody else made them come. It is a human power we all learn, but it is also a weapon, a sword, a wand, a time machine, a teleportation device, an escape hatch. That kind of high is worth its weight in gold. My body manufactures its own high when I firmly press the button labeled heaven over and over and over and over. Intravenous drug users learn to shoot from television and peers. It perpetuates bad habits. All are clumsy with the needle at first. Blood flow works against gravity. Valves usher blood to the heart like a saloon door. Veins are muscles. My body, pitted against a control group. You want to inject in the direction of blood flow, that way it zaps a relief. If the needle goes through the vein, it's all lost. Bevel up, point down. Prevent clogs with cold water. Men know this. It's like washing blood from panties. Men don't know this. It's like washing blood from panties. It's like Mom taught us. There are many ways to talk about the feel-good. V lives outside the realm of metaphor, right down a ways under the bridge. She proclaims out of thin air that she is bi. She says the most beautiful woman she's ever been with was named Cecilia, a white girl with blonde ringlets and green eyes. I finger-popped her, she says. I got on top and rode her until we came. We both cried. She looks at me softly, sincerely, with a sappy closed-mouth smile. You're pretty, she says. Part of witnessing is simultaneous non-reaction and a quick search for recognition of self. Put it in the poem, I say. My body, a shadow to run from. V got so thin she is almost invisible, nothing to grab onto. How many times I've passed a person on the street with the same edgelessness and seen something other than a face, scrambled, and yet the evidence stands. Same two eyes as mine, nostrils, lips, the hard line of chin. Understanding, an obsession of humans. Love, the essence of being alive, connection, understanding, transcendence from understanding. Flesh, just the suitcase. Ooh, that was... I'm like, fun is not the right word for that piece. That was fun to revisit. But it was satisfying to go back there. Thank you. Thank you for publishing me.
Yeah, love.
And it means nothing.
Oh, I mean, it means everything.
And nothing. That's what I was just about to say. And everything. We said it first. That's what I'm saying. Exploding that whole concept.
You're welcome.
But it means a lot to me personally.
And to me.
Yes. Well, I want to say thank you, of course, for letting us come and talk about capitalism and collectivity and philosophy and how we'd sell out for Oprah in a second and all of the things. I always really love getting to hear Elae talk so articulately about these things, and my brain starts going. Can you hear that in the headphones? Better than my crunching of crackers and cheese.
I can't believe you do that, but not crunch. It upsets me.
Yeah, I mean,
so
thank you. It's so great to have spaces for these dialogues, and I think it's to kind of have it be a little open ended is also very nice, and to have the opportunity to have it happen with work. You know, I think so frequently, to bring it all the way back to the beginning, you know, so frequently we divide these conversations, right? It's like, here's a reading or here's a conversation, right? But the two things are inextricable. Right, like everything that we were talking about is in these poems, and these poems and the experience of writing them reflects back on everything we were talking about. So, you know, I think it's important to have these things happen together. And so, thank you for giving us the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, do the shit.
Thank
But
you.
We already knew that.
Glad to hear it. Seriously, because some people have seemed a little taken aback by the lack of structure, but I like it. I like it a lot.
You have the right people at the table for that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I do. Sometimes I do think it is just about like who's here,
Yeah.
you know, because if you can have a conversation, you can have a conversation.
Caits and I are used to structuring space though too, because we're both educators.
Yeah.
Like we've spent
Yeah.
a lot of time. Like I mean, anyone who's taught, like I've spent a lot of time with dead space. You know, like people often say to me, they're like, "Oh, you seem so like chill on stage." I'm like, "Listen, I've been teaching college freshmen for like 15 years. You know how often I have to just like spend an entire hour and a half just like talking because they're making me pull teeth." So
Yep.
yeah. Teaching will help with stage fright. I highly recommend for anyone.
200%.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Kate.
Oh yeah, of course.
guys.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming. This has been great.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and review on whichever platform you're listening. You can get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Animal Riot Press, or through our website, animalriotpress.com. This has been the 20th episode of the Animal Riot podcast with your host, Brian Birnbaum, and featuring Caits Meissner and Elae, a.k.a. Lynne DeSilva-Johnson. Transcripts for our deaf and hard of hearing animals are provided by Jonathan Kay, and we are produced by me, Katie Rainey. See you later, you filthy animals.
Yes, sir, it's the burn. Bombing on y'all and getting gully as the fern. I don't know much about leasing.